Welcome back to the Asylum Plus podcast. My name is Josh Watford, and across the table from me is
John Nicholson's here.
As always.
Indeed. Well, so far always, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's been one podcast that I did with me and Roger.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. I remember that
I did it in his truck before we even had a microphone.
Wow.
I just recorded it on my computer.
My goodness.
And so on that note, just a little sneak peek for everybody. Roger has said that he wants to do another podcast on teaching kids.
Oh, wow.
Or really on like how it's been in the kids' Sunday school class talking about the minor prophets.
I bet that would be great.
He said he wants to do kind of a recap.
All right, yeah, we need to have a bonus Minor Prophets episode with Roger.
I had not told you about that because I had forgotten to tell you about it until we just brought that up.
I've got to be present for that, though, because I want to hear those things firsthand.
Most certainly. So
that's cool.
Yeah, he wants to talk about his experience of teaching kids the Minor Prophets.
Man, that is so good.
And so I think that'd be a worthy podcast to record. And so be on the lookout for that one. That one's hopefully coming sooner rather than later. Yeah. He wants to do it before we end it. That way he can give some encouragement to parents and others to finish
that'd be awesome.
Strong. So.
Man, and just on that note, before we get off into Zephaniah here, just again, I'm so grateful for how folks have engaged with the Minor Prophets. Just side conversations that I've had with individuals, either in the lead up to, what they have read the week before, what they've been talking about, questions that they've had, what's this about, those kinds of things.
Yep.
And that's been a fairly regular feature over the summer. And then certainly in the aftermath, conversations that we're having about, well, here's what we talked about, man, here's where this is applying. And I have just been so encouraged by how so many in the life of our church have engaged in hearing and thinking about the fact that Roger is intentionally helping some of our young saints engage with the Minor Prophets. What a joy that is to know that they're going to have some of that as context in their spiritual formation moving forward.
Oh, yeah. And again, it's been fun reading through these Minor Prophets to kids. When you say, I will utterly sweep away everything from the face of the earth. And, they're like, with a broom? So like, okay, well, yes, no, not with the broom like we use in the kitchen. But, so, pivoting toward Zephaniah.
All right.
We've made it to Zephaniah.
Yeah.
And so we only have 3 books left after Zephaniah, so it seems
we're in the
past.
last third. Yeah, I mean, we're 2/3 of the way through this thing.
Yeah, and Zephaniah is not flyover country.
No.
It may feel like it because it's the 9th out of the 12th and all that. So as far as numbers go, you may be tempted to kind of check out of your Bible reading plan. You may be saying, well, it's only 3 chapters. I can read that on Saturday or anything like that. But no, I encourage y'all to keep consistent because, it's not flyover country.
It's not, but I will tell you this, and here's the honest knee-jerk reaction on that. My first read-through this week with it was, we've been there, done that already.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost kind of like we're just baking this cake one more time, But your second and third reading, you begin to say, oh, okay, here we go.
All right, Zephaniah's got some stuff to say.
Right.
That I think other prophets have not said.
Right. Yeah. And I think also one of the salient things, and this is another piece of this turn or a piece of this puzzle, seeing this as reading it as the 12. Zephaniah is at the end of the southern kingdom. He's at the end of this timeline.
Yep.
The only other one that we have that kind of is outside that is Haggai, and he's after the exile is over. So that one has a different kind of place. But Zephaniah, we're still in this moment of impending judgment.
Yep.
But we're at the to use football terminology, we're at the 2-minute warning moment.
Yeah.
It's here, and we've got to pay attention to this maybe in a little different way.
Well, on that note, it says that, or Zephaniah himself says that he's prophesying in the days of Josiah.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's debate over what part of Josiah's reign he prophesied during. he seems to mention some lines from the book of Deuteronomy here. And if the book of Deuteronomy was the book of the law that Josiah and his guys found in the temple, then it's likely after Josiah enforced the reform, after finding the book of the law in the temple during the renovation. And so, but then the question is, okay, well, Josiah's reforming the country, and it sounds like Zephaniah is pretty mad about how the country's being ran. Right?
Yeah, or at least God is. He's not pleased with it.
Yeah. God is. But you would think that, if Zephaniah was proclaiming the word of the Lord during these reforms, that it really would have been, hey, Josiah, great job, right?
Yeah.
Pat on the back for you, man. And, this group over here is doing what they're doing. Hey, but, there's this one little group that still needs to get their act together. But it just seems like, he's calling out idol worship in the temple.
Yeah.
People are worshiping Milcom, star god, in the temple. That doesn't sound like reform to me. And so it's very possible that this is toward the end of Josiah's reign, particularly when a lot of world powers are getting heated up. Josiah's got this national fervor. He's about to go up against Pharaoh Necho and get obliterated at Megiddo, and so there's all this. And I say all that might seem kind of historically boring to you.
No, I think it is germane to the discussion.
I think it's absolutely germane, absolutely relevant, because this Zephaniah is living in a time where probably the vast majority of the people thinks everything's going pretty good.
Yeah, it looks good on the outside. And I think that may be what's going on. There's another piece of this, and we have to dig a little further back, because in verse 1 it says that it came to Zephaniah, the son of Cushai, son of, and in the list of them is son of Hezekiah.
Yeah, his royal blood.
Yeah, so he's got access, most likely, to the inside story.
Yeah,
he sees the stuff that's behind the curtain and knows what's going on, and there's a moment in Hezekiah's story back in 2 Kings chapter 20, on his deathbed. God spares him, and basically the rough, my rough translation of that is that Hezekiah says, at least that's not going to happen in my day.
Mm-hmm.
Good on me. My grandchildren can deal with that. Kicking the can down the road.
Yep.
Well, the can comes home in Zephaniah's day.
Yeah.
And he's dealing with it. I don't know if there's some family angst with, Grandpa Hezekiah back there, but also with Josiah. And it's evident when you read the story, Josiah did bring reform, and I think it was genuine in Josiah's heart.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like everybody else around him, it was just show, because almost the moment Josiah dies, we're right back where we were, maybe worse.
Yeah. Well, that was when we talked about Habakkuk, we talked about Jehoiakim.
Yep.
Right? So it takes just that quick for things that, he implemented to just be reversed.
Yeah. So this is Micah reaching back there.
Yeah.
Rend your hearts, not your garments.
Mm.
I don't want this surface thing.
Yeah.
Because we can hide the idols in the closet and still have them. God says, I want those things cleaned out.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he's telling Zephaniah. If you won't clean them out, I will clean them out.
That's good.
That's hard.
Well, and so, I don't want to stay too much here on the genealogy.
There's some good stuff there.
But
those are parts that we tend to read over and just kind of throw out because we don't want to pay attention to that. Those are names we don't know. And
right.
What does it mean?
So, for what it's worth, Zephaniah is the son of Cushai.
Yeah.
However you want to say that, and he is one. I'd have to do a real search for it, but he certainly talks about Cush more often than any of the other prophets that I remember reading thus far. And so he seems to have. It seems that his dad was possibly a Cushite. and if he's named after it, and he himself is prophesying a whole bunch about Cush,
which is modern day Egypt
or Ethiopia.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So it's actually possible that Zephaniah was part African, part Jew, and his dad might have been a full-blooded African,
right,
from Ethiopia. And so, yeah, that's just kind of interesting tidbit there that I've looked at in my studies.
Which wouldn't have been unusual because of the royal marriages for treaty purposes and those kinds of things. So that's not a stretch to think about.
Right.
That
yeah. If he's of royal lineage,
right.
That is a high possibility.
And we know that Solomon had interaction with the Cushites and others, and so this is that fits in this narrative that's here. It's an interesting piece there.
Okay, so moving into the actual book.
Okay.
I quoted it earlier. I will utterly sweep away everything, is chapter 1, verse 2. From the face of the earth declares the Lord, I will sweep away man and beast. I will sweep away the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, the rubble with the wicked, and I will cut off mankind from the face of the earth, declares the Lord.
Let that silence tell you everything we need to know, folks.
So as far as, you've said we've been here before, and yeah, in some ways, but this seems probably even more harsh than Nahum, right?
This is judgment on a different level, it says.
Yeah, I mean, this is complete and utter destruction. Every living being swept off the face of the planet. And so I think it's pretty clear when you're just kind of reading through it. I mean, this is a reversal of creation.
Yes.
Right? I mean, he's using the same creation imagery and all the characters of the 6 days of creation, except instead of God creating, he's decreating. And I think it's pretty clear his purpose for doing so when we get to the end of Zephaniah. But here, I think we just need to sit with that for a little while, because I mean, I'm strongly tempted to just, whenever I preach this on Sunday, to just go to chapter 3 and just say, like, here's Zephaniah, right? I will sing over you with gladness.
Right.
But the same God that's doing that does this before all that.
That's how we have to get there. Yeah. This is why, with Easter season, we all want to get to Easter Sunday, but we dare not rush past Good Friday and Holy Saturday.
There's no resurrection without a cross.
We need to enter into those moments of darkness so that the light shines even brighter. And boy, Zephaniah does a good job of making the darkness clear.
Yeah.
Later in chapter 1, talking about the great day of the Lord, it's a day of wrath, a day of distress, anguish, ruin, devastation, darkness and gloom, clouds, thick darkness, trumpet blast, battle cry. I mean, he's pulling out all the stops to describe what a desperate day that is going to be. And I love, Josh, one of the things about this is that it's always the day of the Lord. And this echoes that other place where we see that God's anger is for a moment, but his loving kindness is forever.
Yeah.
So there is this day of wrath, but it is a day. It's a
day.
It's not something that endures. Thank God for that.
Goodness gracious, yeah. I mean, he goes on in verse 17, their blood shall be poured out like dust. Yeah. Right? And silver nor gold will be able to deliver them on the day of the wrath of the Lord. And, that's just a reminder, like, we spend so much time worrying about our stuff here and now. But when that day comes, what will we do?
I attended a funeral today, and the pastor that preached, he talked about Rockefeller, and one of the richest men, one of the first really super tycoon kind of rich men in the modern era. And it was reported that a newspaper reporter asked his son, how much did he leave? And the answer was, he left all of it. It didn't help him at the end. It didn't buy him another minute. And this is what God's saying. And I think this is a pattern. Again, this is, going back to we've baked this cake before, but I think it's something that God, by this repetition, is telling us, because we we are prone to fall into the trap of thinking, I'm the master of my own little universe, or there are individuals like a Nebuchadnezzar. In our modern day, we can think of, politician type figures or celebrity type figures who it seems that they stride the earth and there's nothing that can touch them, that they're untouchable. But this day of the Lord, they're touched.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And so these first 2 chapters of Zephaniah are like that. And I think what's different about Zephaniah is that he does mention particular nations.
Yep.
But his focus seems to be the nations within the whole, right? And so what I mean is that he's talking about sweeping away every living being, but then he focuses in on Judah and Jerusalem and Cush and these others.
Right.
And so it seems that the other prophets did it reverse from what Zephaniah is doing.
Right.
They talk about the local to talk about the global, but I feel like Zephaniah is talking about the global in order to talk about the local. What I mean by that is that he's using global type language to talk about the both and. Mm-hmm. That God's going to judge the world, but let's talk about that, what that means for you, Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of times when we can say, well, God loves the world, that he sent his only son, but it becomes much more personal when he says, when we kind of change that a little bit and just say, well, God so loved you that he sent. Same thing. Like, you're a part of the world, but I think what Zephaniah is doing, he's trying to highlight particularly God's universal judgment that's coming on everybody. And, oh, by the way, Jerusalem, don't forget, you're a part of the universe.
Yeah.
But he doesn't stay at the judgment, right?
Right.
That isn't where it ends up. Zephaniah's message isn't, oh, well, just stinks that everybody's going to get wiped out. Good luck with that.
Right.
Not in my day. Right. And so, anyways, thankfully, that's not the end of God's message, because that is the day of the Lord. But there's a time coming of restoration. Right. Right. Before we move on from that, was there anything else you wanted to say about the judgment and day of the Lord stuff?
I like what you're saying there about that. It's almost, we take the telescopic view to come back to the local view, the microscopic view, if you will, where we are. And I think you're right that that's a tool that Zephaniah uses in making his message clear. Mm. But I think also that allows the people of Judah to look and say, yeah, those folks in Gaza, bad folks, God ought to get them. And Ashkelon, they ought to, they need to be gotten. But then God reveals and says, you've got your own Baals, and you're worshiping Milcom in the temple, and so you are not. This is Paul saying we're all without excuse. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Yep. This is where we all stand. We are all cooked together in this same pot, and this is a terrible situation. So what are we going to do? How do we deal with this? And and this is where he comes to in this 3rd chapter, I think, is the blessing really of God's judgment, that he does put an end to this. This is Nahum, where God does crush this head of wickedness. God does come in. Habakkuk mentions this as well. And this is another one of those themes that we've already seen develop, that God's not blind. He's not asleep. He's not paying attention.
Yep.
He is. But he is long-suffering, and he is patient with this. But there does come a day when that patience it's run its course.
Mm. He is long of nostrils.
Yes. Yeah.
But his nostrils can flare only so wide.
Right.
Yeah. And so God tells them in chapter 3, verse 8, therefore, wait for me, declares the Lord, for the day when I rise up to seize the prey. For my decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms. And you're like, okay, cool, yeah. To pour out my indignation upon them, right? All my burning anger for the fire of my jealousy, all the earth shall be consumed. And you're like, man, I thought I was going to catch a break there.
Yeah.
But that comes in the very next verse.
It does.
for at that time, right? This isn't some other time. This is that time. So there's something that is two sides of the same coin that's happening here. For at that time, I will change the speech of the peoples to a pure speech, that all of them may call upon the name of the Lord and serve him with one accord. From beyond the rivers of Cush, my worshipers, the daughter of my dispersed ones, shall bring my offering. Right? So it's hey, I'm going to gather everybody together, and then I'm going to pour my indignation out upon them, but I'm going to change their speech to a pure speech so that they can call on my name. What do you do with that, John? Like, it's this two extremes, right? And the truth isn't somewhere in the middle of those. It's not like we need to try to balance God, to moderate God, right? It's somehow the truth is in both extremes.
Right. We need his justice. Yeah. Because if God doesn't deal with evil, then he's really not God. And again, one of the the popular notions that's out there is that there's just some dualism, and it's not a new thing that's out there. This is from ancient religions as well, but it's finding a fresh. I call it Star Wars theology. We got to bring balance to the Force, that kind of idea. No, this is not balance. There's no balance here. It's God, and everything else is in subjection to him.
Yep.
And God's judgment is good. God's justice is the right thing in that moment. And we can celebrate that. And there is a sense of Zephaniah, as awful as it is, that is something to be celebrated. But then, as we turn the page, we haven't gotten there fully at the end of this moment where we do see God singing over us.
Yep.
All of that, God's judgment is motivated not because he's hacked off at us or because we've offended whatever, some personal foible that he may have, because he doesn't have any of those. God's justice is all motivated out of his love. And we see this at the very beginning in Hosea. Again, reading this thing as the 12. This is a story about a heartbroken husband who loved his wife, went far beyond, but his wife turned her back on him and went after others. And what does he do? He says, I'm going to come and I'm going to buy you back, and you're going to belong to me, and I am going to purify your heart so that you can know me. This is this story that's being borne out here. So we do need that justice. And thankfully, and this is where we get to read this back through Calvary, through the cross, he did pour out his justice. If we ever have any questions about what God thinks about sin, all we got to do is look at the cross.
Yeah.
But the continuing of evil in the human heart that we see in our world today, and you did a masterful job of that through talking through Habakkuk last Sunday. But we long for God to do something about this.
Yep. And that's a good, I believe, godly inclination of our hearts. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, we're thinking all the way back to Joel. Okay. And Joel talks about on the day of the Lord, when the sun is blotted out, when the moon is turned to blood, he will pour out his spirit on all people, on all flesh, I think is what it says. And so, that's what this makes me think of. For at that time I will change the speech of the peoples to a pure speech. And because this is also talking about the day of the Lord. Because in verse 8, for the day when I rise up to seize the prey, and then in verse 9, for at that time, this is still talking about the same day.
Right.
And it seemed as though Luke, who wrote Acts, and I believe all the apostles who were a part of that actual event, saw that as the fulfillment of at least part of some of the descriptions of the day of the Lord in the prophets.
Yes.
And particularly Joel, because that's what that was Peter's sermon. And he said, look, what Joel talked about back then, talking about the day of the Lord, y'all are witnessing it.
Yeah.
You're watching it. Now, I don't know if the moon turned to blood that day or not. We don't get that part, but, even Peter quotes that part in his sermon. And so, obviously, he didn't think that disproved what was going on. So, I say all that to say that when Zephaniah says in verse 9 about the changing of the speech to pure speech, that all of them may call upon my name, and serving with one accord, it really seems like that has at least been partially fulfilled at Pentecost,
right,
in Acts 2. And so we are living in this reality right now. We're living where not that we're looking forward to this, although we certainly may,
right,
in some sense. I'm still working all that out in my theology, but we can read this and know, like, I'm experiencing that now.
Right.
I'm a part of all the nations that have been gathered together to have a pure speech, so that I can call upon the name of the Lord.
Right.
And that's Jesus.
This is I think that now and not yet tension that we continue to live with.
Yeah.
I am saved, but I know I'm not as I should be yet.
Yeah.
So I am still being saved, and scripturally, theologically, and from the New Testament, I understand that there will be a day when I'll see him face to face, and I'll be made as he is, and I will be saved fully then. So there's that tension that exists there between, yes, God's already fulfilled this. I'm saved. I'm not going to be any more saved, but I will be fulfilled in that.
Yeah.
And this is some of that tension that we do live with. Joel was, as you said, I think very well, is looking forward to that. We are living in the midst of that, still looking forward to the fulfillment of it.
Yeah. So, John, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I know that Zephaniah 3:17. There it is. Golly,
yeah.
I could not find it. I know that's one of your favorite passages.
It absolutely is.
So, but for this podcast, my question for you is, now that we've talked about Zephaniah 1 and 2, how do we read Zephaniah 3:17 in light of the rest of the book? Because it's easy to just pick that out and put it on a pillowcase,
right,
and sit it on our couch and think about how much God loves us, which I think we should do.
Right.
But I don't think Zephaniah wrote this down with that in mind.
Right.
He wrote all this down in mind that we would be reading it all together.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, how do we read a passage like this, which is one of the greatest displays of God's love in the entire Bible, in my opinion?
I agree.
But after we just read a couple of minutes ago that he's going to utterly destroy every living being on the face of the planet, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, talk to us a little bit about that.
I think, Josh, and here's where I am, is that when we do fully see the justice of God, it is going to be a terrible thing. And it's going to be, like we were back in chapter 1, destruction and darkness and gloom and all of those things. It's going to be as bad as we can imagine. And I've often said, we so glibly roll off that fact that the writer of Hebrews gives us, that it's appointed a man to die once and then face the judgment. And we just kind of glibly roll past that. But as a believer, I have to understand that I too will face the judgment seat of God.
Yep.
That is not going to be a good day. Because I know, I look at what I see in the mirror every day. Yeah. And I know that there's so much that's still lacking.
Yep.
So much that I still willingly walk away from in God's desires and designs for my life. And what am I missing in that? I'm still in process. Again, I'm saved, but I'm not yet where I need to be. And God will judge those things. And thankfully, He has once for all done that at the cross. But I will stand before God and give account of those matters. Mm-hmm. And it will be evident not only to me, but to anybody else that happens to be there to bear witness to that. And if I read the end of Revelation right, we'll all be standing there together.
Yep.
I will have nothing to stand on except one thing, and that's Jesus.
That's good.
And because of Jesus, He does exult over us with loud singing.
Yeah.
And that's where I see this.
Yep.
It says back in verse 15, we blow past this, that the Lord has taken away the judgments against you. He's cleared away your enemies. Well, how does that happen? Well, in Joel's day, the enemies were still at the gate. I mean, Babylonians were still strong and doing their things. The Egyptians had just marched through town. There were a lot of folks around that were problematic. But it's more than just those enemies. It's those enemies of our spirit. As Paul will say later, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's against the powers and principalities. It's against these things that war against our very spirit, or against who we are. And this is who God is going to redeem, and that's who He is singing over us. Yeah. That's what He's singing over is. I mention it every time we take the Lord's Supper, that it's who for the joy set before Him, He endured the cross, scorning its shame. We're that joy.
Yeah.
And so I think we read God singing over us in the midst of that judgment. Yes, there are things to be judged. He will deal with them, but He's also providing that point of salvation, that place of coming out of that without fear.
That's good. That'll preach.
It will preach.
I might preach that.
You go right ahead, man. You feel free.
No, thank you, John. That's all I got.
Well, let me give. There's one other thing that has come up out of this, and again, this is baking the cake again, I think, because one of these themes that keeps showing up is God's. He's not going to put up with any pride. And here at the end of chapter 3, we begin to get this. In verse 12, talking about on that day, when He's removed from all that. But He says in verse 12, He says, I will leave in your midst a people humble and lowly. They'll seek refuge in the name of the Lord, and they'll do no injustice, speak no lies. They'll be found, nor will they be found in their mouth a deceitful tongue. But these humble and lowly, these people, and I think this is, as a maturing Christian, this begins to mark a life. That's a great way, I think, for us to determine if someone is truly maturing, is true humility, and it's not something that's put on. It's not that they get the badge of humility and they wear it,
Most humble person.
Right, exactly. And also lowly, that it's not about them polishing an image or having some platform or, looking at particular. There's just this genuine understanding of who they are in Christ. Yeah. And who they are in Christ is they are nothing apart from Him. Apart from Him, as David would just say, apart from you I have no good thing. Yeah. That's someone who is coming to fully understand who they are with God. And then, after that marvelous thing where it says He will exult over you with loud singing, in verse 19 He says, behold, at that time I will deal with all your oppressors. Good news. And then He says, I will save the lame, gather the outcasts, and I'll change their shame into praise and renown in all the earth. You want to talk about the great reversal of creation?
Yep.
Here God is putting the great reversal of human pride.
Yeah.
It's not the people that we think have got all of it together. It's going to be the broken people. This is why I celebrate so well in the life of our church. I'm so grateful to see that there are broken individuals who are coming to hope and health and wholeness because of the love of our church family, because people are committed to following Christ and speaking grace and truth into people's lives over a long track. And it's those people, because, Josh, I've told this before, and with apologies to Mike, I haven't asked his permission to share this, but it just never... We gather on Monday mornings, and it's not an unusual thing for Mike Pollock to have to stop praying just because he gets emotional when he begins talking about the love of God for him. Because most of us know Mike came to Christ here, 7 years ago. He's still a relatively young Christian, but he is continually overwhelmed by God's love for him.
That's so good.
And man, it blows me away every time.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. That's the heart that God is looking for, and that God is drawn near to. Not Mr. Puffed Up and not Mr. Big Platform and not whatever, whoever. It's this one that is lowly of heart and comes and says, Jesus tells the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector in the church, and the Pharisee says, thank you, I'm not like him, and the tax collector is, the one that's up there, and,
Pharisees should be more like him.
Yeah. And man, that gets at me. That gets it, because I have pride. I know that's one of those chief areas that I continue to struggle with. And if I don't pay attention to that lowly and humble individual, I'm missing Christ. And there have been numerous occasions. My wife is so much more tenderhearted with this than I am. I'll blow by people and she'll see them, and I thank God for it, because there have been so many times that she has been right in making us stop and note the person, have that conversation with that individual. And it has humbled me, because I realized there was at least the gleam of Christ in that individual that I needed to see again.
Yeah. I mean, who did Jesus go to the most?
Yeah, always those
the outcasts,
right?
The lame,
yeah,
the blind, crippled, yeah.
And those are the very ones that God says, "I'm going to gather in."
And He said, "I am gentle and lowly, at heart."
Come on.
You know, so He is the perfect man.
Right.
He is what God was looking for to save us. So
Zephaniah is pointing us that direction.
Oh yeah. I think Zephaniah is pointing very clearly in that direction. So yeah. All right. Yeah. I'm looking forward to preaching this on Sunday.
I'm looking forward to hearing you, brother. I absolutely.
So I was telling John that this is sermon prep for me right here. We're doing it kind of early in the week, and so this is sermon prep for me. And it's been really good.
Oh, it always is. And thank all of you who listen, and feel free to share this with some others if you think it'll help them. But
I saw Renee Someone's great recommendation. So
absolutely, thank you, Renee.
Renee, if you're listening to this one, thank you. That was very humbling.
But it is humbling, and we're grateful, because as you've heard us talk about, these are just conversations that Josh and I get to have, and if y'all don't get anything out of it, it's good for us. But we're grateful that y'all are along the journey with this.
Yeah, certainly. So, Haggai next week.
Next week, let's talk about the temple.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. So, anyways, see y'all next time.
Take care.